run for a U.S. Senator in 2020.
Paid for by Willie Wilson for Senate 2020.
Get the best sleep of your life. Helix makes personalized mattresses to fit your unique body type and sleep preferences. Go to helixsleep.com and get up to $200 off during their holiday sale.
8:38, Team Hochberg Traffic Center time, and Jeremy Scott.
Still this problem in Wheeling, Northbrook, where eastbound Palatine Willow roads are closed with a semi that went off in the woods. If you're eastbound on Palatine, you're forced off at Milwaukee Avenue, and you can't get onto Willow Road until you get to Sanders. And we are seeing some heavy delays in the area. Also, as you are traveling in Round Lake, new crash Route 134 and Fairfield roads. Your expressways, the Edens inbound and outbound, looks like those have finally gotten heavier. 18 minutes Lake Cook to the Kennedy Junction, 22 back out. The Kennedy inbound, that is 34 minutes in from the O'Hare area, 14 in from the junction, 12 in your express lanes. Eisenhower inbound 40 in from Route 390, half hour on your outbound side. That's traffic. I'm Jeremy Scott.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center forecast. Sunny, breezy. 51 today, 61 tomorrow. Currently 32. Next news at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So on my syndicated show on Friday, I interviewed John Taffer. Yes, John Taffer from Bar Rescue. A really, really interesting guy. For his podcast, the John Taffer Show podcast, he interviewed President Trump last week to talk about the hospitality industry specifically. And he's a bit of a wild man, is John Taffer, but nobody knows the industry like he does, and particularly the restaurant industry. It's a fascinating discussion he had with Trump, and then I was fortunate to have with him. You can check it out at danprofshow.com. I also tweeted it out at danprofshow. Here's the one key thing that he got from Trump. 4 points, 4 promises that Trump made for the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry generally, restaurant industry specifically, that could produce a V-shaped recovery for the hospitality industry come post-election. One is to broaden the scope of the employee retention tax credit. 2, to extend or reintroduce a payroll protection program that also covered debt accumulated over the past 8 months. Restaurants and hospitality industry businesses that, particularly those subject to on-again, off-again lockdowns in big cities. The third, and Taffer highlights this as a biggie. He knows this sector a lot better than I do. Reintroduce the business lunch tax credit. Implement the business meal write-off immediately. Taffer said, yeah, I think that would have an immediate positive impact on business. And then fourth, a domestic travel incentive program to incentivize any sort of domestic air travel, which is obviously hugely important to destination convention cities like Vegas, Miami, as well as Chicago, as well as business markets like New York, L.A., Chicago. So those are commitments he made that he said seemed to suggest Trump was ready to move on right after the election, regardless of outcome. By the way, Taffer also invited Biden to be on his podcast, talk about the same thing, and the Biden campaign never got back to him. So he's not coming from this because he's necessarily some dyed-in-the-wool Republican or Trump supporter. He's just interested in his industry and trying to help revive it. One other thing he said is that the industry has been impacted unevenly across the country, as you'd expect, even in big cities. So, for example, New Jersey, the restaurant industry, in terms of sales volume, has actually increased year over year. How could that be? Because of the lockdowns in New York and Connecticut and the flight to New Jersey for hospitality, hospitality offerings. The other thing he said is that Chicago going to a lockdown and no in-person dining, the only state in the country to do that.
And now it's the entire state, by the way. All regions are affected.
For Chicagoland to do that, he said, that's a huge mistake. He said, with the incentives that President Trump talked about, if they came to pass, I think, he said, this is him saying it, he thinks that the restaurant industry could rebound by the end of the first quarter of next year. But he said Chicago's going to be a lot longer because there's an exponential negative drag on another lockdown like is being done in Chicago and Illinois. And so he just essentially suggested it's a disastrous decision for Chicago and Illinois. So just highlighting that, because that is distinct from what's happening around the country, even in states with leftist governors who are otherwise inclined to lockdown policies. Still, Chicago and Illinois making the most catastrophic decision you could make with respect to the hospitality industry, according to John Taffer. For more on all of this and small business recovery, pleased to be joined again by Jovita Carranza. She is the administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration, former treasurer of the United States at the U.S. Department of Treasury as well. Jovita, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. It's a real pleasure being here in your audience. And I believe you have Amy there as well.
Yes.
Yes.
It's,
Hello,
it's both of us.
Yeah. Good morning.
We were everywhere together. We know we're never separate. Yeah. So with respect to what John Taffer was talking about with the hospitality industry, and then also talk more globally about another PPP or some other kind of program for small businesses, what is in the offing? Is what John Taffer got out of the president? Is that part of discussions you've been in as well?
Well, Dan, he hit it on the mark because the president has placed small businesses front and center in every discussion he's had. And my visits across the nation are an example of this administration's leadership and diligent work to reopen the economy, and not only the national economy, the local economies. But as you know, Dan, in many cases, that the local economies are governed, obviously, by the governors and the mayors. So if they put some cap on the amount of capacity or the ability to open 100%, that's all determined based on local government and then, of course, the COVID spike. What I've realized, Dan, in visiting many of the restaurants and also entertainment bars where they contract musicians to come and perform, those were the first ones I visited because they were hit the hardest, as you know. And I visited initially in the month of May and June, and some of them were open 20%, maybe 25%. Now they're open 40 to 50%, but that's only 50% of the revenues. I just left San Diego last week, and that restaurant is open 50%. It's a beautiful restaurant in San Diego, right by the Art Museum. And she's struggling. She has over 140 employees. She can't bring them all back. And the customer base is a little squeamish with regards to the COVID. So she's complying with the COVID CDC distancing and the mask and whatnot. But they are truly hit hard. And this president has indicated that the small businesses would realize a tax benefit if he were elected, and another round of PPP. We've been working really long and hard to protect the $130 billion that remain under the Paycheck Protection Program.
And that's what I was going to ask you, that have people been able to retain the employees they have, and have they had a chance to add jobs because of access to this capital?
Well, because I'm only focused right now on the hospitality, Amy, they're the ones that are experiencing about 50% return on customer base and revenues, but their employees, because they applied the Paycheck Protection Program as designed, they were able to bring back around, I would say, about 80% of their employees. And in some cases, those that have pivoted and were able to incorporate the curbside and the delivery and pickup, they are actually doing better than pre-COVID. And the manufacturing sector is doing really, really well. I visited a lot of manufacturers owned by veterans, owned by women and minorities, and a boatload of engineers. They produce special products and services for the government, and they're actually thriving. As a matter of fact, I visited a business in, I think it was Phoenix, Arizona, just last week, and the gentleman said, I'm waiting for a contract, and if I get the okay on that contract, I'll be able to bring on 140 employees. That's pretty significant during COVID times, and those are the stories you don't hear much about, Amy.
Now, did all of the PPP money that was allocated get dispersed, or is there still a balance in that account?
There's a balance of $130 billion, and from what I understand in these negotiations, Dan, they're looking, the president wants to go big, and I believe that they have identified several billion more to add on to the Paycheck Protection Program. Of course, as you know, Dan, the ink is still wet. They're still negotiating with the House and Senate. So I'm just anxious with my staff to start, flip the switch and start dispersing those funds with the partnership of the 5,400 banks that we've aligned.
Well, so for the $130 billion, if there's a business that for whatever reason wanted to access it that didn't, since that money has already been allocated, they can still make application.
There's two things they can do. One, there are a lot of businesses, Dan, to your point, that did not apply. They were apprehensive. They didn't understand the process, but they've been working with their local banks, and now they're poised to now apply for the first time. But then you have other businesses, Dan, that can also take advantage of this next PPP and reapply. And there's going to be parameters like, for instance, if there's a particular significant revenue loss, if they're looking to continue growing their business and they need more funds to allocate additional employees. And so there's some dynamics that they're discussing where even former recipients of the PPP can apply. Of course, it's going to be a different cap. I don't think it's going to be $10 million. Might be $5 million, maybe $2 million. Right now, the discussion is a cap of about $2 million. But even with that cap, a lot of small businesses are very interested in pursuing that third round of PPP.
And what about, rather than any sort of lump sum bailout to the airlines, what about something on the order of what apparently was discussed between President Trump and John Taffer, the domestic travel incentives to get people who want to move around the country or incentivize them to move around the country if that's what they were otherwise inclined to do so, because, of course, that has a ripple effect on small businesses around the country as well that are part of the hospitality industry and rely on people traveling, conventions and the like.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the restaurants that I visited, Dan, were very strategic. I went to Louisiana. I went to all the hot spots where there's significant conferences, as you indicated, and recreational travel, such as in Florida. I went to Tampa. And I also went to Orlando, which is, as you know, a children's world. And then I also visited Miami. And so all of them are looking forward to accessing the PPP because it's about retaining their infrastructure. It's about retaining their employees. And they have been hurt. Now, you specified the airline. I've been flying, I would say 50% of the time, and the other time I drive for safety reasons. But the flights are either 100% or 90% capacity, and that's all local markets. I haven't done any international. It's all domestic. And I know that the Secretary of Treasury is working with the White House as well as the House and Small Business Committee to address that particular industry sector, especially domestic, because, as you know, we transport military, we transport business, and all of those have to be sustained in order to protect not only our national economy, which, as you know, represents about $10 to $11 trillion and 31 million small businesses, but also our national security. We have military people moving from base to base, and that's also necessary for national security.
She is Jovita Carranza, Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, former Treasurer of the United States at the U.S. Department of Treasury as well. Jovita Carranza, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political announcement.
Springfield politicians are at it again,
making big promises about their so-called fair tax amendment.
But what are the facts?
Their amendment just gives Springfield politicians new constitutional power to raise income taxes on all taxpayers.
With no limits,
no controls on their spending,
no accountability,
and no voter approval of the actual tax rates. So despite what Springfield politicians claim, nothing in their amendment says only the rich will pay higher taxes.
Nothing protects lower and middle class families from higher taxes.
And nothing protects retirement income from being taxed.